And welcome on into the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. As always, George Bremer, Ryan Hickey here with you. I'm just going to say, George, we have made it. We have made it to draft week. This is our last pod we're going to do previewing the draft. The next few pods that will be coming your way will be reaction to actual moves made. No more speculation, no more projection. We will actually have real concrete moves to react to and hopefully praise Chris Ballard for, or maybe get on him for some draft day moves as well. We got a lot to break down on this preview episode, including we will give you our official Blue Horseshoe Podcast prediction. What will Chris Ballard and the Colts do on Thursday night in the first round? Will they trade up, trade down, stay there 15? Who will they select? The official on-the-record prediction will be made just here in a few minutes. We'll also give you best case scenario, worst case scenario, what to expect on Thursday night as well. George, I can't wait. I know it's not a quarterback draft, obviously, like last year was. So there's a lot of anticipation for the Colts hopefully drafting their franchise guy. But with that said, 15, with all different directions this team can go, I'm just excited that we're finally here and we could finally stop speculating and wondering. And now we'll actually get concrete answers in about 48 hours or so from now.
I'm definitely excited to put all the speculation to bed and get out there and start transitioning on to how does this guy fit into the team and why was he picked and how are they going to use him and those sorts of things. I feel like that happens every year, but the length of time between the end of the season and the start of the draft is ridiculous, and you always feel it in April because as it starts getting closer and closer, this is where we start getting the weird rumors. And this year you got the Jaden Daniels stuff. He doesn't want to play for the Commanders and does want to play for the Raiders, and there's just too much time in the run up to the draft, and it just lets so much insanity in.
Maybe it's me because the Colts are not in the quarterback market, like definitively out right on the quarterback market for the first time since they had Andrew Luck, and maybe just because last year we were in the dark so much that there's just so much wonderment of what they're going to do. But at least compared to last year, George, I feel like at least this draft season, it is long and it is honestly annoying. I don't feel like it's gone by pretty fast compared to at least definitely last year.
Oh yeah, last year felt like a century, I think. But a lot of that, like you said, you knew that they were targeting a quarterback. There was so much uncertainty at the top of that draft, and it played out in an unexpected way. I mean, I don't know many people that had C.J. Stroud to Houston at 2, and I don't know anybody that had Houston trading back into 3 to get Will Anderson. So I don't know that this year's going to be as unpredictable. We'll see when we get into it. It always ends up being a little bit different than we expect. But I feel like going into, we have a better idea of what top 5 or 6 is going to look like, at least in terms of names, maybe not matched with teams, than we did a year ago.
That's true. We definitely know a lot of quarterbacks and a lot of receivers are going to be going high early and often in the draft. It's a good time, at least for the Colts, to not be desperate for one of those two positions with where they are at pick 15. We will get to, again, some draft predictions here in a second. But last week, George, on the most recent pod, we did react to the DeForest Buckner extension that he got from the Colts. Clearly, right, well-deserved. But what was interesting was the fact, 2 things. Number one, the cap hit for him this year was lowered. Colts don't do that usually. They don't extend it and kick money down the road. This is a rare move they made to open up cap space and give themselves flexibility for this year. They also put a void year. I think it was 1, maybe 2. I'm blanking now on the exact details. I forget. But they at least put 1 void year on DeForest Buckner's contract, which is another thing the Colts and Chris Ballard rarely do in their time when it comes to contracts. They don't like to move money around a lot. And that had me thinking, George, last week, could we see a possible draft day move? Right now, we've seen the draft in recent years become more active, not only for teams trading up in the draft, but some big-time players moving around draft time and getting traded for some from draft capital. And so I thought to myself, George, could we see a draft day trade from Chris Ballard? He's done it once before with DeForest Buckner and just giving away a pick. But could we see now a player, again now, coming back to the Colts? And there are a few names that at least are possibly on the trade market that could make sense. This is not If I had to, I'll give you the one player I think is most likely here, but a few names to kind of sprinkle and give you a little tease. Now, this was early in the offseason. I'm not seeing this recently, but it does fit a position of need, and it does help maybe the Colts save some draft capital. Mark Andrews' name early in the offseason was on, I don't want to say the trade market, but there was like one or two articles I read that had his name floated out there. He has no guaranteed money left. He got 2 years left on his deal. And it was cited his age, injury history, and also the fact that the Ravens down the stretch went 7-1 without him in the lineup. Maybe that coupled with the rise of Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews could be in the move. I don't think it's very likely, but it would make sense in the point of the Colts need a tight end. He's obviously a playmaking tight end, a little bit on the older side, but good leadership. I don't think that's likely or possible. Greg Newsome, corner for the Browns, 5th-year option, or going into year number 4, has a 5th-year option that the Browns have to make a decision on by next month. Crowded secondary there, good young player. They moved him to the slot because they have some good corners on the outside they feel good about. That could be a cap casualty kind of guy that wants to get paid, and the Browns right now just have a surplus of good defensive backs. Let me just ask, and throw one more name by you here, 2 more names by you here, George, just get your initial thoughts before I give you, I think, the possible most likely outcome here. T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, both receivers, both looking to get paid. Right now, both of their teams and the 49ers, Bengals, respectively, obviously have a lot of salary cap tied up to other players on the roster. It doesn't look like either are going to get a contract extension from their current team. I don't personally, I'm going to hear your thoughts here. I don't think Chris Ballard is trading any sort of draft capital for a receiver. I don't think he's trading for T. Higgins. I don't think he's trading for Brandon Ayuk. He signed Michael Pittman Jr., obviously that big deal. I think if he's going to bring another receiver to this team, it's going to be at pick 15 or maybe even in the second round, not by making a big trade in which you have to then pay the guy you're trading for. I don't think he's going to trade for a guy like Mark. I don't think Mark Andrews is actually realistic, but I read it, so I figured I'd just at least throw it out there. Greg Newsome, I think, is interesting. I don't think, though, he's on the Colts radar. What do you think about that?
I think Newsome's the most likely of those 4. But I would agree it's probably not something the Colts. It doesn't sound completely like something the Colts would do. Newsome's a guy I really liked in the draft. You know, he's a guy that was on my list that year for potential Colts draft picks. So that's probably why I'm leaning that way. Confirmation bias on my part. Yeah, Andrews, I think the age comes into play there. But the one thing with him is if he were available and if the Colts were interested, as you said, it wouldn't be a massively expensive deal. You wouldn't think in terms of what you got to give up to get him because of the age. And so be a veteran in that room, which, you know, tight end room's got Mo Alley Cox, so they're not in great need of a veteran leader, but certainly they could find ways to use Mark Andrews. I think they would be fine with that. I still wouldn't count that as likely. In both receiver situations, those are going to be pretty expensive deals in both of those cases. I don't think you're going to get either of those guys cheap, both in terms of the contract you're going to have to sign them to, but in terms of, you know, capital that you're going to have to give up to bring them in. And that just doesn't seem like a Chris Ballard move at this point in the offseason. I mean, when you look at the route that they've taken, it would surprise me. Now, you know, who knows? I mean, things happen all the time that you don't see coming, but those 2 in particular of that group, I would put them the least likely. I mean, if I had to like rank them in terms of likelihood, Newsome, Andrews, and then the receivers.
I would agree. The receivers, I think, are by far the least likely, but those are 2 names that we could definitely see on the move here in the next few days. So I would agree. Receivers out. Mark Andrews unrealistic, and Greg Newsome is possible. I don't think likely though. Mm-hmm. The name, George, I have settled on that I think is on the trade market that we could realistically see traded in the next few days that fits what the Colts want to do in terms of contract, age, position of need as well. Matthew Judon, defensive end for the Patriots. He's in the last year of his deal. The Patriots are going nowhere. Right? This is a total rebuild for them, so there's no point in having a veteran defensive end on their roster who's going to be a free agent after this year. You heard Chris talk about explosive playmakers, right? That's what he wants on both sides of the ball. And even though the Colts set a Indy franchise record for sacks last year, we did talk about the pass rush at times disappearing. It was 2 hit or miss. They moved, they made a move in firing Nate Ollie, bringing Charlie Partridge in. So they changed defensive line coaches. They want change there. They've not addressed the position in the offseason. And you look at the draft, not a lot of depth or explosive playmakers really outside of Dallas Turner, right? That's been the one position where you could say it, like the Colts could use an upgrade, but especially at pick 15 and even in the second or third round, there's not a lot of players that are going to be realistically there for you to take that you feel really good about. So it's a position that is not terribly deep or elite in the draft. And you look at Matthew Judon, who's, I know he got hurt last year, but also in the 4 games he played, he had 4 sacks. Before that, the last 2 years, 2021, 2022 combined for, was it 28 sacks in 2 years. The guy consistently gets after the quarterback. And again, last year on his deal, $14 million cap hit. So he fits into right now your cap space. For Colts have about $20 million available to them right now. And the final thing, George, is when you look at what you would have to give up, because he's in the final year of his deal, I would assume, I think you can keep your first and second round pick. Like, I don't think you would need a first or second round pick, at least this year, to give up to get Matthew Judon on the team for this season. Your thoughts, George?
That one makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think he's a horseshoe guy in terms of everything you've seen off the field, character, leadership. He's got all that. The Patriots had that, I think it was 2021. They had that giant free agent frenzy where they went out and they signed like 100 guys. And it feels like Judon's the one guy that worked out from that entire group. Like everybody
100%.
else probably didn't reach the level they hoped that they would. I think so. That he can walk in that situation and produce immediately. That's one of the things you always wonder with you're adding a guy from the outside, right? Comes in a new system. How's it going to look? Went from Baltimore to New England, looked fine. Picked up right where he left off. Anchor of that defense, really, the last few years. So, to bring a guy like that in, I think would be incredibly valuable for Indy. It's a young defense. We've talked about that a lot. They do have leaders, but they don't have anybody who would kind of, outside of DeForest Buckner, they don't have anybody who would really command that sort of respect on and off the field. With the list of accomplishments, I would imagine Buckner would vote for this pretty quickly because it would help free him up. He might only see double teams next year instead of triple teams, which would be, for him, a massive upgrade. I still think, and I know you're on the same page on this. I still think any trade right now is not incredibly likely, but this one makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think if you can get it in that middle round range, add a guy as accomplished as Judon is on the field. But again, we know it's an important cog for the Colts, as accomplished as he is off the field as well. I mean, you're talking about a guy that could walk in here and add to that captain's group with Buckner, with Zaire Franklin immediately. He's right there in that mold. Kenny Moore, Julian Blackman, anybody you want to look at as leaders on this defense, Judon fits right in with that bunch. And I think that to me is why you can't rule it out, because I can't find a red flag here where Ballard would immediately say, yeah, but maybe age, but he's been productive. So I don't think that's an issue either. You're not talking about a guy that's yes, he's coming off an injury. So I guess that would be the one potential, concern. But you're not talking about like a reclamation project here. It's not a situation where the numbers dipped and they've got to find a way to get him back. I don't find a lot of reason not to do it other than just the gut feeling the Colts aren't going to make a trade. But I think that is a really good fit and would be a really good idea.
History says you're right. This is a pipe dream, not going to happen. But I just keep coming back to it. You look at what they did. Like, there was no reason, right, when they restructured DeForest Buckner's contract, gave an extension, where they opened up basically $13 million cap space and essentially doubled their cap, the cap space that available this past week. I know you have the draft class coming in, and that's obviously going to take up a little bit of it, but it's like this move felt like they were preparing for something. And like we've talked about before with Chris Ballard, the one thing I think we can confidently say is he is a snake in the grass. He doesn't telegraph anything. He doesn't have, leaks through the media. The last big trade he made, right, in at least in the sense of that worked out with draft capital was DeForest Buckner. No, I mean, Joe, you talked to them like no one had any idea this is coming down to all of a sudden, boom, there's the news. Like DeForest Buckner's out of Colt. Oh, okay. First round pick is gone. Like, wow, no one saw that coming. Um, it's one of those things where I feel like because there's so much like not that no one's paying attention, but at least I'll look at this from the national perspective. No one looked at the DeForest Buckner contract nationally and said, "Oh, the Colts maybe are up to something." I feel like Ballard snake in the grass. It's not like this is not a move. It's not the Eagles trading for AJ Brown where it's like one of those home run is going to swing your win total, 3 wins by just getting, a premier elite wide receiver entering his prime. Like you mentioned, there's injury concerns. He's a little bit older, but leadership perspective, massive for Chris Ballard. Checks that box. You even look at New England, like you said, he was able to take his final big contract year in Baltimore, parlay that into a big time deal in New England. And to his credit, in the first 2 years, was unstoppable. And that's along with the fact that there was no one else on the other side of the defensive line for the Pats that was worth worrying about. So just like DeForest Buckner, Judon's facing double teams on a consistent basis and still winning. And so now if you bring him in and you give up a third or fourth round pick, yes, coming off an injury, but he's someone that can win one-on-ones, is going to command attention, which helps DeForest Buckner. And on the other end, whether it's Samson Ebukam, whether it's Kwity Paye, now all of a sudden allows them more one-on-one opportunities. So maybe they now can get more wins and get after the quarterback as well. In this division, right, where you have the Texans loading up on offense, when you have the Jaguars, I think still a threat with Trevor Lawrence there, when you have the Titans going forward at least and signing Calvin Ridley and retaining DeAndre Hopkins and at least trying to give Will Levis every possible opportunity to succeed, part of making Anthony Richardson's life easier, right, is getting after the quarterback. Sad not having the other team put up a lot of points. I would say, George, out of 100%, I would say there's a 60% chance it happens. I keep coming back to like, just because like, I think it's more likely to happen than not because like, I just don't think they made this, they open up the cap space with DeForest Buckner's contract and put void years. Like they are doing things they never really do. I don't think it's an accident or I don't think it's just like, screw it. We'll just do this, but not do anything with it. I think they're planning on using that cap space they opened up. And I think you look at who's available and who fits this team. I think number one on that list is Matthew Judon.
I mean, you're not going with the make Twitter go nuts explanation. That wasn't enough for you from Chris Ballard there on why the cap space exists. Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think it makes perfect sense. I think it's a perfect fit for this team. I just don't. I want to say there was a situation with T.Y. Hilton. I can't remember where it was, where they saved some money around. I want to say around the trade deadline. They restructured something and they got some more cap space. And we all were waiting with bated breath. Okay, what are they going to do? And nothing came of it. So, the official explanation is flexibility, but that could mean a trade. I mean, flexibility is such a big cover word here. It could mean that somebody else is being re-signed, but I feel like they're pretty close to done with that, right? I mean, there's not anybody. Ryan Kelly would be the other one who maybe you could do a new deal for. But for the most part, those deals are already done. They got Zaire Franklin, they got DeForest Buckner. They obviously re-signed all the free agents this offseason. AR's deal is still far enough out in the future that it doesn't affect him. Maybe you're trying to carry something over next year if you need it for, I don't know, one of the younger players, but it just doesn't. That's not a likely reason to me that this money's here. You could be to have the ability to pick some more guys up. Like I said, I still lean more towards the signing after the draft. Not that they're going to use all of the money there, but that it gives them a cushion, once the draft's done to go and sign, I don't know, for instance, a free safety, or, whatever they felt like they were going to be able to pick up in the draft and they weren't able to do. We've seen Ballard do that before, especially as we get into the summer months. Even after training camp starts, there's an ability there. You never know. There's surprise cuts after the draft every year. There's surprise cuts usually in June, every year. So it might, I kind of feel like it's more towards that. It's not necessarily pinned on, one specific move. It is flexibility in the idea of, hey, we don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of months and let's be ready for it. But the idea that it could be for a specific move, I think that's still legitimate. I mean, I don't think you can rule that out. And of all the people that you've thrown out there today, Judon's the one that I really would look at and say, okay, I can see them doing that.
If it was to happen, I think it'd be one of those Friday day 2 moves, just because again, I don't think
Mhm.
you're not giving up a first round pick for Judon. I don't think you have to give up a second round pick. So it's a little bit one of those, like, I would say day 2 move. So keep an eye on that for Friday. You absolutely could be right, George. Like I said, there's still a lot of, and especially in the safety market, a position the Colts need. They want to go after someone like Justin Simmons. That cap space could go a long way to getting him here and signing what I would say still is a premier safety on the free agent market. But either way, whether it's signing a safety or signing a free agent veteran, making a trade like this, it feels like something's brewing. Something is definitely brewing more than just flexibility and more than just, well, we got some draft class, we got the draft class we got to sign, so we got to free up some space there. I think Chris Ballard's at least trying to make something work here. So keep an eye on that as well outside of the draft for the next few days. Back to the draft, George. If I asked you, fast forward Thursday night, the best case scenario for Chris Ballard and the Colts in the first round would be, what would your answer be?
I mean, the absolute best case, like if we're not even counting realistic moves here, if it's just something that would be the greatest possible outcome, would be trading up to 4 and getting Marvin Harrison. If we're dealing with realistic range, I think what our friend Chad Ryder on last week's pod, and you can go check that out now everywhere that you listen to your pods. Uh, his plan there of trading up for Brock Bowers, I think is probably the best case scenario in my mind.
I'll take it a step further. I would say the absolute best case, and maybe this borders on reality, is sitting at 15 and drafting Brock Bowers.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can keep all your draft capital and get, I think, the guy that fits your team the best, I think that's the best case scenario. Even, let me ask you this. Let me throw this scenario out by you here. What is a better scenario you think for the Colts? Let's just say, trading up to 4, which would probably entail bare minimum giving up next year's first round pick. Bare minimum. Maybe next year's second round pick as well, or maybe 2 first round picks.
Mm-hmm.
Trading up to 4 and getting Marvin Harrison Jr., or staying at 15, getting Brock Bowers. What would you say is better for the Colts?
For the box office, trading up for Harrison, because I think the ticket sales would go through the roof. If nothing else, half of Columbus, Ohio would come over and go to games on Sundays. But from the roster standpoint, which is what really matters, Bowers. I mean, because you're going to have the ability to add more around him again next year and the year after that. And I think on the field, I think Bauer's impact going to be closer than you would think. Not that the numbers are going to be the same, but what he can do to this offense, what he can open up for this offense would be closer than you would think to what they would get from Marvin Harrison Jr.
I would agree. I think you're better off with Bowers at 15. This is what I'm about to say is not a knock or a diss on Marvin Harrison Jr. He is clearly the best receiver in the NFL. But I think what you've realized in the last few years is it's a lot easier to get a great receiver in the draft than is a great tight end. I mean, now tight end is starting to pick up. Sam Laporta's a really good young tight end as well, making some nice plays. But like you look at like how many great receivers are there in the NFL versus how many great tight ends? I mean, the receiver group doubles, maybe triples in just sheer volume compared to great tight ends. So like it's just a rare commodity you have to grab, which like you said also too is a position of the Colts need where, I mean, if you have to get a receiver next year or 2 years from now, it's a lot easier to find one in the draft, even if you're not picking number 4 or 5 versus, trying to get a great tight end in the draft. It's a lot harder because there's less of them in college and less of them in football in general. So
Mm.
Marvin Harrison Jr., great receiver. I would buy his jersey immediately. I don't even have an Anthony Richardson jersey. I would go get a Marvin Harrison Jr. jersey immediately
There
if
might
they
be
could
like a
get him at
3 year
four.
wait list if
That's
that
the only,
happened though. You'd be on a long, long wait for that.
you're probably right about that. Now that also what number would he get would be very fascinating as well,
Mhm.
since the two top numbers that I think he would choose are taken. We'll
He
say.
might be able to get 88. He might be the one. Might be the one guy.
You may be right. You may be right. I hope he doesn't have to pay his dad for that, you know. But maybe a new car for a dad can get that number 88 down from the Ring of Honor and back on the field. But that I would be fired up. But in terms of like what is better for the Colts, keeping your draft capital and getting Brock Bowers or giving up a boatload, getting Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm with you there in terms of Brock Bowers being, I think, the better value for the Colts, especially keeping their draft capital moving forward. One thing here before, speaking of Brock Bowers, before we go to the worst case scenario, I noticed this, and I don't know if this is the Colts subtly trying to say something or not. You have talked about, right, in the past with Chris Ballard. He doesn't really lie, right? He'll tell you what it is. You may not know in the moment what he's talking about or what he's hinting at. Then once, whether it's a sign, trade, draft pick, once that move is made, then you look back like, oh, that's what he was saying. I could be looking into this too much, George. But I did notice on social media on Monday, the Colts about once a month, right, have put out a mock draft Monday. Well, they'll highlight two mock drafts and just show what other media are predicting the Colts to do. I don't think it's an accident that on the last mock draft Monday that the Colts social media is putting out, they happen to choose the two, and to my knowledge, at this point, the only two mock drafts that have the Colts trading up. The one they highlighted was Peter Schrager's from maybe now 2 weeks ago, last week, 10 days ago, where he had the Colts trading up to draft Malik Neighbors at number 8 or number 9. And then the other, like, who had it? Maybe it was CBS Sports. The other mock draft where they had the Colts trading to 12 and getting Dallas Turner. Anything you think there, George, that when the Colts do this once a month, they had plenty of mock drafts to pick from. They happened to highlight the two that had them trading up in the draft. Your thoughts?
Usually, the social media doesn't give us much hints. I will say that. I tried that early on because they would go to the draft and they would, they would share like workout videos of specific players, and I'd be like, is there something here? Why are they choosing this player and not that player? But that's usually not had a big correlation. It's usually more like that presser that we just did with Ballard. There's something in there. I guarantee you. I don't know what yet. I will know Sunday. There's something in there that he said that is a pathway to who they're going to pick, and you usually don't see it. And once the draft is over, you can go back and go, you know, he was talking about that pick right here because there's something in there that is just straight out mentioned it. It'll be interesting to see. I do think he was careful with to kind of go back to the social media thing. He was careful with the trade up questions because he didn't flat out say no. And he started also with that kind of joke that he does, well, I just said we were going to trade down, which sometimes is also a defense mechanism of I'm not going to give away too much here. And what he said is pretty basic. It's you could say it every year, that basically there has to be the right guy out there that they value enough to give up extra picks for. And then he's got to be at the right cost, which means he's got to slip to the right level. And then there has to be a team willing to make the deal. So the thing about that I think is the disingenuous part of that, I guess, is that he already knows the last part of that, the third one. He doesn't know. He knows two of those three. He knows whether there's somebody he'd give up enough to get, and he knows whether there's a team because they've already explored trade. That doesn't happen on the clock. The
Right.
trade won't bounce. It won't happen as we've talked about until they're on the clock. But you don't negotiate a draft day trade on the clock unless was it the Vikings or the Ravens that one year that missed their pick because the negotiation went through the. That's the only way you're doing that. So they know two of those three. already. They know if there's somebody that they would trade up for, obviously, that's the easy one. And they know if there's somebody who they can swing a deal with. The only part of the equation they're not sure of yet is will that person fall into the range where their trade partner sits? You know, I don't know that answer either, but I thought it was intriguing. And I think every year, honestly, I bet there have been more talks as far as moving up than we're remotely aware of. But things just happen that either the guy gets taken before that spot, or sometimes the other team changes their mind. Not in that they're not somebody falls that they didn't expect.
Right.
So they don't all of a sudden the pick isn't available anymore. There's so many things that happen, especially in this range where we're talking like 9, 10, well, it won't be 10, but in that 8, 9 range, it's gonna be harder to predict obviously how you get there. So a team might initially say, yeah, we're open to a deal, and then, well, like the Bears, for instance, let's throw them out there because I know they're a popular, trade partner. What if Roma Dunze is on the clock at 9? Are the Bears still willing to trade out? You'd have to ask Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus. We'll get them on and find out, from them in
They'll
person.
tell
But
us.
yeah, they'll let us know. Those are the things that, like, I guess it's a long way of saying I think Ballard not trading up isn't just a function of him not wanting to do it. It's a function of the planets kind of have to align here. You almost need, we just had the clips a few weeks ago. You almost need that kind of scenario to get the trade up to happen because you have to have so many moving pieces. The guy has to be there, the team has to be willing to move, and it has to be a price that you can live with. I would say some GMs are more willing to give up more, like that's the Ballard part of it, or have a longer list of guys they would trade up for. But I I would just bet. I don't know this. He hasn't said anything off the record. I would just bet there's been a lot more inquiries about moving up in the last 7 years than anybody realizes.
With a lot of what you said, I am in complete lockstep with. You're right. Like, I think every year, like you said, there's 10 minutes on the clock. There is no shot in hell Chris Ballard or any team is sitting there saying, oh, this team's on the clock. Let's give them a call, see if we can work out a deal, having done zero groundwork before. There's not enough time. There's like 4 or 5 teams calling probably at a time, depending on, the team and the prospects on the board. Like, just go back to last year. It's all over social media. You can type it in and find it very quickly. Do you remember that Monty Ossenfort clip when they showed him in the war room at pick 3, and it was when the Texans traded up from 12 to 3? In the 10 minutes, he's taken like 4 different calls. He's weighing his options. Like, you don't make a split-second decision like that with no groundwork being laid. So I'm with you 100%. I would bet whatever it is just short of my life, because I don't want to risk that too much here. You never know. But I would bet anything short of my life here at this point to say Chris Ballard has called the Bears. He's maybe called the Falcons. He's called 3 or 4 teams bare minimum in front of him just to say, hey, look, if there's a certain player here, what would it take for you to move off the board? And I'm with you in the sense that if the Colts don't trade up don't trade up Thursday, that is not only on Chris Ballard. He could be willing to move. He could be willing to overpay to move. But like you said, if there's a player on the board that whatever team that he's trying to trade with, they want, or they get blown out of the water with just a ridiculous deal that no one's going to match, there's nothing Chris Ballard can do. It takes 2 to tango. And so whether it is, the Falcons maybe at 8, or the Bears at 9, or, a team like the Broncos or Raiders, at 12 and 13, whatever it may be, or if the Vikings move up at 11, and then let's just say it's the Patriots sitting there or the Cardinals sitting there at 11, and they want to move back a few more spots as well, like it's not just as simple as Chris Ballard pick up the phone and saying, hey, trade this pick to me. I want this guy. It doesn't, you're 100% right. It takes 2 to tango. So if there's no trade up, even no trade down, doesn't mean Chris Ballard wasn't trying to do it. It just means that he either couldn't do it at the price he wants, or there's no teams willing to play ball and they wanted to make the pick there at whatever spot we're talking about. So I'm in lockstep with you 1,000,000% on that. It's not, the blame is not solely on Chris Ballard. if they don't trade up or trade down, because you need a willing partner in order to do that. On the flip side here, George, we go from best case scenario to worst case scenario. What would you say if we sit here on Thursday night would be the worst possible outcome for the Colts?
Not coming away. Well, that's too general. I would say trading down from 15 because your group that you feel like you could pick there is already off the board. And then the spot that you trade down to, it happens again. So you had to trade down twice and you're out of the first round. That I think would be the worst possible scenario where, because knowing Ballard and the way he operates, there's a list, however many guys it is. He says he's got 19 to 21 first round picks. So we know that. But there's a list of probably 3, 4, maybe 5 guys at 15 that they would feel comfortable with. Those guys aren't there. That's where the trade down becomes, or if like 4 of them are there, that's where the trade down becomes a possibility. And then when you trade down, you're doing it not beyond that 19 to 21 usually. But if you get down there and you still don't feel comfortable, that to me is the worst possible outcome, where you end up not making a pick in the first round this year.
Mine is similar. I'll put a name on it in the sense of like the Colts trade down, and I'll say for this argument, draft Terrion Arnold or like cornerback 2. Because I think at this point, like, especially now with Anthony Richardson, it's time to get talent on this team. Draft picks obviously are great, but the Colts, they have 7 picks. It's not like they have like 2 picks and they got to reload and try to get some depth. They have 7 picks. And like we talked about
Chicago.
too, right. They're not the Bears with no draft capital. And we talked about this a few weeks ago as well. The Colts roster, with what they decided to do this offseason, is pretty set and pretty deep. So, like, there's a chance that if they pick all 7, make all 7 draft picks, there's a chance 2, 3 of those guys don't even make the squad. So it's like the Colts are not in a position where they need to make all their picks because they have a lot of positions that are already taken up for. So I don't think accumulating more picks is the answer. At this point, it's about accumulating talent and accumulating the best possible talent you can. And you look at every analysis in terms of at least the corner position specifically. It is clearly Quinyon Mitchell 1, and then you can rotate, maybe Terrion Arnold 2, but there's I would say not a consensus 2, 3, 4 in terms of who's the best corner behind Mitchell at 15. So it's like, if he's there, and I'm assuming he is because I've not seen really many projections that say he's going to go before 15, the Colts should have the pick of the litter at corner 15. And assuming that's the case, that he's on the board there at 15 and Chris Ballard decides to trade back, you got to start, especially at corner, especially that position where there's a lot of inexperience and a lot of questions at that position. You got to just take the best talent you can. And I don't think, we don't see that much of a gap between 1 and 2, so we'll trade down, get an extra pick, and then we'll take the second guy. Getting the second guy, which is something Chris Ballard's done, I think, too often, at this point, when you have AR and now it's go time, not acceptable. That's, I think, would say, George, the worst case scenario.
I agree. I don't think this is the year that if you've got 4 guys that you like at 15, you trade down. I think you take the top of those 4. I agree with you 100%. I don't think this is the year to do that. In fact, we've talked before. One of the reasons we think this is a good trade up year is because you might not even need all 7 of the picks that you have this year. Now, he did kind of shoot that down. So I think that part of our theory may not be as strong, mostly because I think he looks at it differently. We're talking about, hey, if you draft 7 guys, all 7 might not make it this year. You've reached a point on the roster where, yes, there's needs and you need depth at certain positions, but they're a strong enough roster now that they may not have 7 spots available on the 53-man, depending on how the draft shakes out. And so, when you look at it from that angle, it makes sense. But Ballard and he always has looked at it this way, and I should have known better when I said it, a week ago. His view is more of the more picks you get, the better chance you have of hitting on the ones, on a few of them. So he's not as worried about cutting the 6th or 7th guy as he is about making sure, giving them the best chance that they get that 2 or 3 out of the mix, however many picks it was, that are impact players. So I don't think that, I don't think the fact that they don't need maybe as many picks will factor into any of the decisions that he makes. But I don't think that affects what you just said, which is making sure that the ones that you have, you're getting the highest quality. So even if you keep all 7 or you trade down later in you want to make sure that you're getting the number 1 corner, not the number 2, the number 4 receiver, not number 5, whatever the best possible
Right.
outcome is. I think you're at that point where I agree with you. Quality over quantity is, in my mind, it should be paramount right now.
And to that point, George, I think Chris Ballard can also be aggressive in this draft and not have it just be trade up from 15 to 9 or trade up from 15 to 12, whatever. To your point, let's just say there's truly 5 guys they have on the board that say, hey, if they're at 15, we're taking them and we're going to feel good about. Let's just say there's a situation where all 5 guys are there. Well, what is precluding, George, Chris Ballard from saying, we're going to take guy number 1 and then monitor, because if guy 4 or 5 starts to slip, maybe whether it's trading up in the second round or trading back into the first round late, like why, like Chris Ballard, too many times, I think you're right in the sense of he looks at it. We have 5 guys we like, so we'll just trade down and whoever falls to us, we'll get. This, I think, should be the offseason. This should be the draft where we got 5 guys you like. Let's take number 1 and let's monitor 4 and 5. If they start to fall here, we could get 2 of the top 5 guys we like either in the first round or early in the second round. And to your point of terms of like having them hit, make the roster, be impact players, well, if you can get out of the pool of 5 players you like, instead of just getting 1, and maybe it's the 4th or 5th guy in that pool, why not get 2 of the 5? The 1st and 4th guy, the 1st and 5th guy, the 2nd and 5th guy, and trust your scouting of, we think this guy's really good. So why not just like, there's nothing that is stopping Chris Ballard from doing that. And it's another way he can be aggressive outside of just moving up in the first round. It's trading back into the first round or moving up in the second round to get guys that you have real conviction on.
I think that that's low key something you could see them do this year. It's something that people haven't talked about a lot, but I think it makes sense. And look, last time they did it, worked out pretty well. And we want to talk about stuff they've put out on social media recently. The 2020 look back, Pittman and Taylor. When they went back up and got Jonathan Taylor, would you say that's the best draft haul in the last 5 years? I would say it is. Getting those 2, and then you add Julian Blackmon, who they traded up for in the 3rd round as well. They didn't have a first round pick that year, and it worked out pretty darn well for him. So I think that's something that, yeah, I think if you could pull that off again this year, you could, at 15 pick Quinion Mitchell, and then come back in to that 20 to 29 range, wherever it's going to take it to do it, and get a Brian Thomas Jr. or get a Xavier Worthy. I think that would be a really good outcome. Maybe right after Brock Bowers in terms of best possible outcome for this team.
I'm with you. And that's like, I hope, again, Chris Ballard to talk about, using the draft, using everything he has at his disposal to help Anthony Richardson. And I think that's a way where it's not like the first thing you think of, oh, you're going to be aggressive in the draft. I think everyone thinks automatically, oh, we're going to trade up in the draft. You don't have to do that. And you can, instead of trading up, let's say, and like if you trade with the Bears, right? I would say bare minimum giving up your second round pick. The Bears don't have a second round pick. They, like you said, they have 4 draft picks in this draft. They want picks this year in 2024. If you go from 15 to 9, you could get Brock Bowers. I'd be excited. Sounds like you'd be excited. But you're also doing so, you're giving up your second round pick this year, I'd say bare minimum. If Ballard doesn't want to do that, but still wants to be aggressive, there's another way. That's the other way to do it, is being aggressive at the end of the first, early in the second. And like you said, I'm glad you brought that up, because that video came right to mind of the last time they did that. Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman Jr. Both were, one was they picked in the second.
They're both second round picks.
Right. Second round picks. One was like the second overall pick in the second round. I forget how exactly.
Pittman was set right after T. Higgins.
Right. Yes. Thank you. That worked out to perfection. Both are extended. Both have been tremendous contributors. Why not try to do that again in 2024 and just, again, make your life easier for your now second year QB?
And the other thing about, like, when you talk about going up, to 9 for Bowers, the Blackmon trade kind of shows the blueprint for that. It was later in the draft, but he went up into the 3rd round to get him. And then they made another deal and pretty much got the pick back that they had given up for Blackman. So, there are ways to move around like that you could see him do. I just wanted that was coming to mind. Sorry to interrupt you, but that is another. If we're looking back at his history, that's something that you could look at and say, okay, it's earlier in the draft, but it does show a blueprint of kind of how he handles these things.
No, it's a great point, and you're right. It's not like there. The overall point is there's a lot of creativity you can do here. And I think if you're Chris Ballard, I think going back to the worst case scenario is seeing 3, 4, 5 guys available and just be like, yeah, I'm happy with one, so I'll trade down. I think the best teams and the Texans last year, Texans saw, oh, Will Anderson Jr. is there. We're going to be aggressive. Again, you got the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year. They're not sweating that, first round pick they gave up to go get him. They feel pretty good. Getting guys you have conviction about and being aggressive in getting guys you truly believe in, more times than not, you don't regret it. And I think that's if you're Chris Ballard, I think that would suit you well this year. So we talked a lot about, George, what could happen, what Chris Ballard should do. Now it's time to put pen, not pencil, pen to paper. Make it official, George. The official 2024 Blue Horseshoe Podcast, Colts first round prediction. Do you want to go first or you want me to go first?
You go first. I think this will be interesting. I want to see what you have to say.
Okay. I'm going to go unconventional here. I do think this is the year Chris Ballard is aggressive, and I think Chris Ballard listens to his head coach in Shane Steichen, who we've talked about in multiple press conferences, has in the most Shane Steichen way, if you will, has raved about a position while almost saying nothing about the position itself and not naming any names. But he, a few different times this offseason, has talked about the importance of the tight end position and how it can really unlock an offense. We saw the weakness in the sense of just the inconsistency at that position where the Colts had a lot of guys, but no true game breakers. I think Chris Ballard does what he has done before in the past, listens to his head coach, and makes a move to get Brock Bowers. I think the Colts go from 15-9. They make a trade with the Bears. They get Brock Bowers as my official prediction. Brock Bowers to the Colts, number 9. Lock it up. Let's go. Let's go, George. Let's go.
It would make for an interesting Thursday for me. There's no question about that.
Oh, it would.
That's the way it plays out. I would be a busy man again. So I don't know if it would be Caitlin Clark levels of excitement here in Indy, but it would be that would fire the fan base up. That would get the Colts fans,
Let me tell you, if Halliburton tonight goes off and evens that series against the Bucks, and if the Colts trade up to get Brock Bowers, that Friday is going to be electric.
Oh my goodness, yes. If the Colts nail somebody in this draft that gets his fan base fired up and the series comes back even on Friday, yeah, that'll be absolutely insane. Pacers got to find a way to get Caitlin Clark in the building for that, right?
Oh.
Just to get the pop from the crowd, if nothing else.
They revved the race car right before the game.
They do. She's got to
be. I mean,
she got to be doing it.
Slam dunk.
Yep.
Gold out too. Come on, it's already made.
You would think. We'll see how that one plays out. Or Brock Bowers can go and rev the race car as well. So we'll see how it goes.
Save him for game 4.
Save that for game 4. Give him some time to get his feet wet first. Not his first day in Indy, right? Don't put that kind of pressure on him. For me, I'm going to go boring. Well, not boring, but I'm going to go more traditional just because I think for me, I always play the percentages because I just feel like that's with Ballard, it's best to just look at what's the most likely outcome. And from my standpoint, that's Quinion Mitchell. There is a chance he goes ahead of 15. And if he does, I think that's where you see a trade down scenario come into play. Because I think in my mind, the 3 guys that they like best at 15 are Brock Bowers, Dallas Turner, Quinion Mitchell. If one of those 3 is not there, I think that's where potentially a trade down comes into play. But I'm not sure that Brian Thomas isn't also on that 15 list. He definitely would be there as a trade down, but he's one of those guys that's hard to pin right now where the value best is. I think Xavier Worthy is a trade down target if they lose that 15 spot. And we talked about that last week as well. So again, go and check out those podcasts wherever you listen or on YouTube, where you watch us in full color. But I think Quinion Mitchell, just there's so many things about that pick that scream Chris Ballard to me. And we've talked about this before too, but the athleticism is off the charts. He went to a small school. He's got that chip on his shoulder. The Ballard always loves that. He rose his stock specifically at the Senior Bowl, which is another really big mark for Ballard. And it's a position of need. And one thing we know, he takes best player available, but we have not seen him in the first round or with the first pick, wherever that comes in a draft. It's never been a position that you're scratching your head about. I've talked a lot this offseason about, hey, when we say it's definitely a corner, it's not necessarily a corner. That happens. But it's not a position where like they're set there. What's he doing? He's never taken like a running back this year or something where you're just totally, at a loss to understand where the guy fits in. It's always been a need, maybe not the need, but it's always been a need. And corner certainly is probably the need. So I feel like Quinion Mitchell, but the Brock Bowers thing fits that as well. I mean, if you were going to put down the three biggest needs coming into Thursday night, I think it's corner, wide receiver, tight end. Maybe not necessarily in that order. Those three positions are the biggest needs. So I think it's gonna be one of those three spots, whether it's straight down or not. But I just feel like if you're gonna play the percentages, play the odds, the most likely outcome is Quinion Mitchell.
I mean, I can't argue that. I mean, in the sense of what you need, being like not going for the flashy item, which Chris Ballard has not done it, and Brock Bowers would be trading up, would be the flashy item for sure. That is that is the Chris Ballard pick. Like if he stays true to character, you're gonna be 100% right. If he changes it up and is aggressive and does want to, whether it's listen to his head coach, help Anthony Richardson out, both maybe, that's where we could see a deviation. But if you, like you said, play the percentages and look at history and percentages say Quinion Mitchell 15 to the Colts, lock it up. It's gonna be interesting, George. It's gonna be very interesting. I'm very excited for Thursday night's pod. We will be recording a late night pod. So if you're not up, that's fair. It'll be in your feeds Friday morning on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, and also wherever you get your podcasts at the same name. George, you'll be I should say at headquarters, right? In the war room ish.
Well, we'll be
media room.
A few blocks away from it feels like in the building, a few blocks away from the war room, but we'll be in there. We'll be waiting very patiently along with everybody else to see how this plays out. I will say this is the week to hit your notification bell because we are going to have a Thursday pod at some point after that, and we will have a draft recap pod that we're still kind of debating on where that's going to fall. So definitely a week to hit that notification bell so you will know when new Blue Horseshoe content is up.
That's right. Instant grades, instant analysis. We will be giving you everything you need to know, not only about the Colts first round pick, right? We got to say Chris Ballard, if they make a first round pick, but also second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, aiming right now. We'll go behind the curtain. Aiming for Sunday morning is when we'll kind of do the full draft recap show. Maybe Sunday night, Monday morning, etc. We'll see kind of how timing is. Especially George, it could be, like you said, a busy weekend. So maybe that pushes back our deadline as well, or not deadline, but just our recording time, if you will, depending on the moves made and how splashy Chris Ballard decides to go. But that's what you can expect. Definitely late Thursday. We'll be burning the midnight oil, reacting to what Chris Ballard does. Also, get your set over the weekend, early Monday morning as well for a full draft reaction. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be busy. There's going to be a lot of long nights, a lot of long days. But George, I can't wait.
It's going to be fun. And again, I think, I went with a traditional pick. You went with a fun pick. There's a lot of different outcomes. I mean, there's probably 10, 11, 12 different ways this plays out on Thursday. And that, to me, is when the draft gets really fun.
Oh, yeah. Lastly here, George and I gave you our pick. Who would you say your pick is, or what is the best case scenario for the Colts? Round one, best case scenario when the Colts are on the clock is, let us know on Twitter, GM Bremers, where you could tweet George, tweet myself, Ryan _Hickey, and the number 3. Easiest way, YouTube. Again, Blue Horseshoe Pod, subscribe. Even if you're listening to the pod, appreciate you. But if you want to have your voice heard, give your opinion, give your prediction, if you will, of who the Colts are going to pick or what the best case scenario is before the pick is made on Thursday night, YouTube comment section right under this video. Give your pick who Chris Ballard should take and who can help change this Colts team for 2024 and hopefully beyond. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you after the draft, after round 1, right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.